Let me hit you with a truth most men never realize until it's too late. Your absence says more to a woman than your words ever could. It speaks in silence. It burns through her thoughts. And if you do it right, it makes you unforgettable. But this isn't just about pulling back. It's about awakening something deeper. Because the moment you're no longer available, she doesn't just notice the quiet. She feels it. Not in her ears, but in her rhythm. In the questions that creep in at night when no one's watching. In the sudden awareness that something she expected would always be there, isn't. That's when the emotional tide turns. That's when the chase, without you ever lifting a finger, starts to reverse. This isn't manipulation. It's contrast. And when done with calm strength, it draws her into reflection, not reaction. Because women don't bond to logic. They respond to emotional disruption. And silence, when it comes from a man who knows his worth, becomes the sharpest form of presence she can feel. So if you're tired of over-explaining, tired of chasing, tired of always being the one who reaches out, this is for you. In this video, we're not guessing. We're going to explore, step by step, what a woman actually feels when you step away. From a place of power, not pettiness. From real-life patterns, not wishful thinking. If that sounds like the kind of truth you've been looking for, like this video, subscribe to Stoic Station, and let's begin. 1. Your absence pulls her into emotional curiosity. When you withdraw, it's not just your voice that vanishes. It's your energy, your presence, your emotional availability. At first, she might brush it off. She tells herself you're probably just caught up with work, needing space, maybe taking time for yourself. But silence, when it lingers, has a strange effect. It doesn't just create distance, it stirs questions. She starts feeling the shift, not because you said something dramatic or caused a scene, but precisely because you didn't. You stopped showing up the way you used to. The rhythm changed, and now she's left trying to understand the new tempo. That's when the thoughts start creeping in. Why hasn't he texted me? Did I do something wrong? Did I misread him? Does he even care anymore? And just like that, the emotional dynamic reverses. You go from the predictable man who always reached out, always reassured, always gave her certainty, to the one she can't read anymore. You become the unknown variable, and that's where emotional curiosity takes root. Because women aren't drawn to what they fully understand. They're pulled toward what stirs something unspoken. It's not manipulation, it's contrast. Most men, when they sense distance, move in closer, explaining, validating, pouring their emotions out in hopes of reigniting connection. But a man who chooses stillness, who chooses presence through absence, triggers something deeper. He becomes a question mark in her mind. And that question mark is louder than any message he could have sent. She starts checking her phone more often, not to respond, but to see if you've said anything. She rereads your last message, looking for clues. She rewinds your conversations, wondering if she missed a sign, a signal, a subtle shift. Your absence begins to occupy more space than your presence ever did, because now she's the one invested in decoding what you've chosen not to explain. That's the emotional shift most men never reach. Not because they're incapable, but because they fear being misunderstood more than they value being felt. But when you let your silence speak and hold your ground with calm, collected energy, she doesn't just notice your absence, she becomes drawn to it, curious about it, and more importantly, moved by it. 2. She feels what you once felt, the power shift. There's a moment every man remembers, the ache of waiting, the endless loop of refreshing her status, the quiet desperation of wondering if your presence meant anything at all. You replay conversations, grasp at memories, and try to decode the silence on her end. You feel powerless, as if your worth is suspended in someone else's decision to care. Now, without forcing it, without retaliation or resentment, she's entering that same space. Not because you tried to hurt her, but because you simply removed the energy she had grown used to consuming. When you stop giving your attention so freely, when your presence becomes a privilege instead of a given, something shifts. She starts to feel the void, not just in her inbox, but in her emotional rhythm. The same comfort she once took for granted has vanished, and in its place is uncertainty. Not the kind that makes her angry, but the kind that unsettles her. She doesn't know where she stands anymore. And what's more powerful than her confusion is the realization that she doesn't have access to the part of you she always assumed would be there. This isn't about revenge. It's not a tactic to make her suffer. It's balance, emotional balance. The same weight you carried is now in her hands. She may not reach out. She may act unbothered. But in her quiet moments, in the shower, before bed, during the drive home, her thoughts drift back to you, not because you're flooding her with messages, but because you're not. She begins to feel what it's like to want clarity and not receive it, to crave reassurance and get silence, to feel the emotional tension of caring about someone who's no longer validating that care, and it rattles her. What makes this shift so potent is that it's not loud. It doesn't come with confrontation or closure. It creeps in through absence. It builds as she realizes the attention that once comforted her is no longer available. She can't explain why it stings, only that it does. And for the first time, she's carrying the emotional weight you once bore in silence. 3. You become the mystery. Her mind can't solve. Most men think silence is the end of connection, but when used with emotional composure, silence becomes the beginning of something far more powerful. It becomes intrigue. Because true mystery isn't loud, it's still. It doesn't demand attention. It draws it in without effort. And when you're no longer available, no longer explaining yourself, no longer feeding her ego with predictable patterns, she starts noticing. But she doesn't show it. She watches quietly. She lingers longer on your profile, checks your stories without reacting, skims through your old posts with a racing mind and a still face. She won't like anything. She won't comment. She won't let you see her curiosity. But it's alive, and it's growing. The silence you thought might make you disappear is doing the opposite. It's making you unforgettable. Because your absence didn't signal weakness, it created tension. The emotional kind that doesn't scream, but simmers. She starts asking herself silent questions. Is he moving on? Did he ever really care? Is he seeing someone else? Is he happier now that I'm not there? Her mind goes to work, and the story it creates about you is no longer under your control. That's the beauty and the danger of being a mystery. Your absence creates a mystery she needs to solve, and the more stable and calm you are in that silence, the more power it holds. This isn't about manipulation, it's about emotional gravity. When you were accessible, she could categorize you. She knew what to expect. But now there's a void, a question mark. And the human mind, especially a woman's emotional mind, cannot sit with unanswered questions for long. The emotional tension she feels isn't caused by what you've done, but by what you've withheld. Your silence speaks in riddles. It raises doubts. It challenges her assumptions. And without lifting a finger, without sending a single message, you become a presence in her thoughts she can't quiet down. Because you're no longer just a man she dated, you've become the mystery her mind can't solve. 4. The worst thing you can do is rescue her from it. There's a point in the silence where the emotional shift begins to take root, when she's not just missing you, but questioning herself. That moment is fragile, powerful, and absolutely necessary. But it's also the exact moment when most men self-sabotage. They check in, they cave, They reach out not because it's right, but because the discomfort of doing nothing becomes too loud. It feels innocent, sending that quick message just to see how she's doing. But underneath it is fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that your silence means the end. So you act. You speak too soon. You break the tension, and in doing so, you cut off something that was finally starting to work in your favor. You just interrupted the process. She was obsessing, wondering, doubting herself, and you relieved her of that pressure. She was turning inward. She was beginning to wonder if she had pushed you too far, if her coldness had consequences, if maybe you had finally outgrown the pattern. That self-reflection, that inner uncertainty, it was the beginning of emotional accountability. But when you rush in to comfort her, even subtly, you give her something even more dangerous than attention. You give her certainty. Don't be the man who protects her from her own discomfort. Let her feel it. Let her sit in the space you once knew so well. The waiting, the silence, the not knowing. Let her ask herself, what happened to him? Let her reach the place where she starts to see her own role in your disappearance. You were never punishing her. You were simply stepping back from a dynamic that no longer served you. And when she finally begins to miss the version of you she once took for granted, that's when the emotional weight begins to settle in. This is where meaning is born, in the silence, in the uncertainty, in the space where she has to earn the right to your presence again. Not because you're cruel, but because you finally understand what your presence is worth. Don't interrupt the process. Let it unfold. Let her feel the absence fully, because only then can your return, if it happens, mean something real. 5. She starts measuring other men against you. Once you step out of her life without pleading, explaining, or chasing, you don't just leave space, you leave a standard. And that standard, whether she admits it or not, becomes the measuring stick for every man that comes after you. At first, she may not even realize she's doing it. She tells herself she's moved on, that she's open to something new. But slowly, comparisons begin to surface. The new guy might be polite. He might be consistent. He might show up exactly the way she once wished you would. But he lacks something, and that something is you. It's the weight of your presence, the way you carried silence without insecurity, the steadiness you held even in the moments when things were uncertain. That's not something another man can replicate. It's not charm, it's not effort, it's essence. Ask yourself, when she thinks back on you, what does she remember? That question matters more than any apology you could offer or any message you wish you'd sent. Because memory isn't always logical, it's emotional. And emotion doesn't cling to perfection. It clings to energy, to feeling, to depth. If you were the man who moved with clarity, who didn't need to overexpress to be felt, then she'll remember the way your silence had gravity. She'll remember how it felt to sit across from you and know that you didn't need her attention to define your worth. That's the kind of man she starts holding up against everyone else. But if you gave everything away in hopes of being loved, if your energy screamed uncertainty and need, then you didn't leave a standard. You left a relief. And that's a truth most men have to confront. Longing doesn't grow in the absence of someone who was forgettable. It grows in the absence of someone who was solid, someone who walked away not to hurt her, but because he respected himself enough to stop showing up where he was no longer valued. That's the difference between being remembered and being replaced. And that difference is built in the way you carried yourself before you were gone. 6. The anger she hides is a sign you've shifted the power. At first glance, she looks fine, maybe even great. She's posting stories with friends, resharing quotes about healing and peace, smiling just enough to make it seem like nothing's off. If you didn't know better, you'd think she's already moved on. But if you look closer, closer than the filters and the curated happiness, you'd see something else simmering just beneath the surface. Frustration, not at what you did, but at what you didn't do. She's not mad because you were cruel. She's mad because you didn't follow the script. She expected you to crack under the pressure, to come crawling back with explanations, apologies, promises. That's what most men do. They try to soothe the discomfort before it fully sets in, but you didn't. You held your ground. You didn't chase. You didn't fold. You disappeared with dignity. And now she's angry, not just at the silence, but at what the silence reflects. It reflects your self-respect, your strength, your refusal to play a role in her emotional cycle. Suddenly, she's not the one holding all the power, and her ego feels it. That calm exterior, the one she's projecting online, and maybe even in person, is hiding a storm of emotions she can't fully process. Behind that calm exterior is a storm of emotions she's trying to hide. The smile is real, but it's forced. The peace she talks about, it's not something she's found. It's something she's trying to convince herself she has. Because if she lets herself admit that your silence bothers her, she has to confront the fact that she may not have mattered as much as she thought she did. And here's where most men break the spell. They confuse her silence for indifference. They interpret her smile as closure. And they reach out, they check in. They hand her back the very power they just reclaimed. Don't do it. Don't interrupt that anger. Let her sit in it. Let her feel the burn of her ego collapsing. Because that fire she's feeling, it's not just anger, it's transformation. She's experiencing, maybe for the first time, what it feels like when someone she thought she controlled chooses not to be controlled anymore. This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. You're giving her space to realize that connection is not guaranteed, that access to you is not a birthright, that attention isn't something she can summon on command. And in that silence, as her ego struggles and her pride burns, something powerful is happening. She's learning about you, about herself, about what it actually means to be with a man who doesn't need to be needed. So don't fear her hidden anger. Let it run its course. Let her wrestle with the silence and what it means. Because when you allow her to feel the full discomfort of no longer being chased, you don't just shift the power. You teach her something no words ever could. 7. Her imagination makes you bigger than life. Silence has a strange way of expanding your presence in someone's mind. The less you say, the more space you occupy. And in a woman's world, especially one who's been used to your attention, your consistency, your emotional availability, your absence doesn't go unnoticed. It becomes a canvas. One her mind fills with color, movement, and stories that never actually happened. She doesn't need a reason to imagine. The quiet itself is reason enough. And what begins as curiosity soon spirals into a series of emotional storylines where you're no longer the man she once knew. You're now the man she can't stop thinking about. You're in places she's never seen, doing things she never expected, with people she doesn't recognize. You become the star of a film she never agreed to direct, but now can't stop playing. She's reacting to who she thinks you've become, and that illusion is sometimes more powerful than reality. The details don't have to be true. You don't need to be on a date. You don't need to be thriving. You don't even have to post anything. What matters is that she can't confirm anything, and that lack of certainty breeds obsession. If you were calm, centered, masculine, and even slightly unpredictable before the silence began, her mind will assume the best version of you and fear that she lost it. She might picture you laughing with another woman. She might replay old memories and twist them into new meanings. She might read your last message as if it were a hidden goodbye, even if it wasn't. Her emotions detach from reality and begin responding to how your absence makes her feel, not what actually happened. And that's the power of doing nothing. The less you engage, the more her imagination does everything. You don't have to argue, you don't have to prove your value. Because in her mind, the mystery you've created is more captivating than anything you could have said. And sometimes, what she believes about you in silence becomes more powerful than who you were when you were speaking. 8. She sends you tests in disguise. She won't come out and say she misses you. That would mean revealing too much. Instead, she'll send something harmless on the surface. A casual, "Hey," or a like on a photo you posted weeks ago. Maybe she'll bring up an old item she forgot to return, or mention something insignificant just to create a reason for contact. These gestures feel random, innocent, even friendly, but they're not. They're tests. She's not reaching out to reconnect with vulnerability. She's reaching out to see if she still has pull, if you'll bite, if you'll validate her again. She wants to know, do I still have power over him? And if you answer too fast, too warm, or too open, she gets the reassurance she was fishing for. She breathes easy, not because she wants to rebuild something meaningful, but because you've unknowingly confirmed you're still emotionally available. And just like that, she relaxes. The tension breaks. You go from mystery to memory. This is where most men fall out of frame. They confuse these disguised tests for genuine interest. But emotional maturity is about reading the moment, not reacting to it. Be calm, be kind, but don't collapse. You don't have to be cold, but you do have to be centered. The way you respond tells her everything, not just about where you stand, but about whether or not you've truly changed. If she's testing the waters, don't dive in. Let her tread uncertainty a little longer. Because it's in that uncertainty that attraction grows, not in the comfort of instant replies. 9. She begins to question her own worth. When you step back and stop feeding the connection, it's easy to think your silence means nothing to her. But what you've actually done is far more powerful than simply going quiet. You've created emotional space. And in that space, reflection begins. At first, she focuses on you. She tries to make sense of your distance, wondering what changed. But over time, the lens shifts inward. Slowly, she begins to question herself. Did I come off too detached? Was I dismissive when he was vulnerable? Did I take his presence for granted? These thoughts don't arrive all at once. They grow quietly in the stillness you've left behind. When there's no one to blame, no new messages to decode, and no attention to fall back on, she starts replaying moments through a different filter, one that's no longer about control, but about consequence. Women don't miss you because they love you. They miss the power you had over them. And when that power is no longer available, when the man who once gave freely has chosen stillness instead of pursuit, something shifts. She stops assuming she was always the prize. She starts wondering if maybe, just maybe, she let go of something rare. Not because you tried to prove your value, but because you stopped trying altogether. If you stay grounded long enough, if you resist the urge to explain or fix, your absence becomes more than silence. It becomes clarity. She won't just miss you, she'll feel the weight of losing a man who no longer needs to be chosen to know his worth. And that realization stays with her long after the silence ends. Summary. And when all is said and done, here's what it really comes down to. This was never about playing games or trying to manipulate an outcome. It's about understanding that value doesn't need to chase validation. True strength lies in knowing when to engage and when to step back with intention, not bitterness. When a woman feels your absence, not as punishment, but as presence withheld with purpose, something inside her shifts. She no longer sees you as reactive. She begins to recognize a man who doesn't move from desperation, but from discernment. Silence in this space becomes a declaration. A quiet reminder that your energy is no longer available to those who once overlooked it. And that, more than anything you could have said, forces her to see you through a different lens. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. If you do this with calm, with clarity, with respect for yourself, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Your silence will say everything. It will carry more weight than words ever could. And the ones who truly saw your worth will feel it. Not through noise, but through the powerful absence of a man who finally knows who he is. If you didn't show strength when it mattered, then your silence now won't carry any weight. But if something in this message spoke to you, share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Like this video. Subscribe to Stoic Station. Let's keep building something real. No noise, just truth. That actually works.